She's also active in professional legal activities. In 2009, she was elected as a member of the American Law Institute. Her passion is Illinois state government, especially the Illinois Constitution. And we're certainly very fortunate that she agreed to share with us her thoughts on, and then that was the title, What is Going On with the Illinois Pension Plan?
Is this the right place for the mic? Okay. I'm tempted to begin with fellow septuagenarian professors, because I think most of you are about my age. It's just that I haven't retired yet. First, let me say that I'm probably the only one in this room who does not have any rights in a public pension system in Illinois. When I left state government in 1983, I took the option of cashing in the $4,000 I had contributed to SARES, State Employee Retirement System. I used the money to have a grand vacation in Italy. Maybe I should get my money in SARES, who knows. Anyway, I do not have a direct financial interest in the outcome over the debate and litigation concerning public pensions in Illinois, but I have, of course, a general interest. Second, let me repeat the exact language of the Guarantee of Public Pension Rights in the Illinois Constitution. Article 13, Section 5 reads, membership in any pension or retirement system of the state, any unit of local government or school district, or any agency or instrumentality thereof, shall be an enforceable contractual relationship, the benefits of which shall not be diminished or impaired. The key words are enforceable contractual relationship and benefits of which shall not be diminished or impaired. Pensions for public employees, indeed for private employees too, are relatively new. A century ago, it was rare for anyone to have a pension, let alone a guarantee of a pension. So Social Security changed all that in 1936. Although it was billed as an insurance system, not a deferred compensation or old age support system, it has become a principal means of support for those who are no longer working full-time. Finally, there were enough public employees in Illinois enrolled in a public pension system that the General Assembly created a joint committee of both houses called the Pension Laws Commission. 1940 was the first year that the commission issued a report. It shows that, by the standards of the day, the public pension systems were funded at a 40% level, a low level even for those times. In 1938, the New York State Legislature had so little money that it was paying public school teachers and some other public employees in scrip. If you're old enough to know what scrip is, you're very old, like me. Okay, now, scrip is a kind of a promissory note. The situation was so volatile that the legislature submitted an amendment to the New York Constitution in virtually the same language as that of Illinois. The point was that while teachers and others would suffer economically during the Depression, they would be guaranteed a pension when they retired in the future. New Yorkers adopted that amendment. Today, about a half dozen states have some sort of guarantee of a public pension. The Illinois provision arose during the 1969-1970 Illinois Constitutional Convention. From the beginning of the convention, some public employees, including university professors, wrote the delegates asking them to support a guarantee similar to New York's. The Committee on Local Government heard testimony from downstate firefighters and police officers about the failure of their districts to fund their pensions. The firefighters and police officers were afraid that the only money in the pension funds was the money that they themselves were contributing. Their fear was that when they retired, there would be insufficient money to pay them the pension promised. Remember that all or virtually all of them were non-participants in Social Security. Let me add one thing here. I am a participant in Social Security. I get a check every month. Thank you. Okay? Despite these entreaties, none of the committees at the convention proposed a guarantee of public employee pension rights. Finally, in July 1970, one delegate, Henry Green of Champaign-Urbana, proposed such a guarantee. His co-sponsors were chiefly people who were or had been public employees. The draft Green proposed was based on the New York provision and is essentially what Illinois has today. The debate covers about 4 pages of the transcript, which is to say almost 2 hours. The discussion makes it clear that everyone realized that there was a serious problem with funding, and perhaps more significantly, everyone realized that this was a strongly worded provision. The issue was whether such a guarantee was appropriate for a constitution. Should the guarantee, which applied only to public employees, be raised to constitutional status? Or should the legislative process be given a free rein to decide how to regulate and fund public pensions? The debate cut across party ideological and geographical lines. I want to note that Delegate Michael J. Madigan voted yes. Some delegates who had been state legislators voted no. The Pension Laws Commission opposed the proposal because it believed that the language was so tight, so strong, that it restricted the legislature's ability to deal with pensions issues. Tied in with the debate was the delegates' knowledge of what was then happening in the private sector. As companies merged in the 1960s, some longtime employees completely lost their pensions. If a company went out of business, the employees frequently lost their business too. As one delegate said to me, I saw what happened when my uncle, a World War II veteran, lost his job when his company left Chicago for cheaper costs downstate. He also lost his pension. In the end, the delegates voted to adopt the proposed guarantee. So far as I remember, some public employee unions supported the Constitution in part because of the guarantee, and nobody opposed the Constitution for that reason. Let's put this into context. A contractual relationship was what the public employees were seeking. Some private pensions are contractual relationships, which means that if the private employer doesn't pay the pension, the retired employees can sue for breach of contract. That is a private cause of action. Public employees did not have that right until the 1970 Illinois Constitution. Sure, a public employee might sue in court saying that the governmental body owed him a pension, but the court could not enforce this because it could not force the governmental body to appropriate the funds to pay the employee. There is a saying, a court cannot mandamus the legislature, meaning it cannot force a governmental body to perform a purely governmental act, such as appropriating money to a pension fund. However, just yesterday, the 4th District of the Illinois Appellate Court decided a case called County Treasurers Association versus Hamer. This may have changed the situation regarding whether a court can order a legislature to do anything. The county treasurers were entitled to a stipend from the state as a salary supplement. The state did not pay. I am not certain, but there may be language in the opinion suggesting that in some circumstances a court can issue an order to the legislature to compel the legislature to pay funds. We'll see. Now, I want to emphasize, this was just yesterday, just taking a quick look at it. I haven't talked with a lot of people, okay? I think that at the very minimum, Article 13, Section 5 gives public employees the right to sue for breach of contract in court. Since the defendant would be the government, they could sue in the Illinois Court of Claims and, if necessary, obtain a judgment against the pension funds and maybe the general fund of the state of Illinois, if they're successful. Most of the early litigation concerning the public pension guarantee clause was run-of-the-mill. Courts were reluctant to get into the political thicket of the proper level of funding. Nobody wanted to tell a governmental body that it had to raise its contribution level to that necessary to pay future obligations. The level of funding still remained among the lowest in the nation, usually around 40%, sometimes reaching up to 60%, never reaching 80%, which is the generally accepted level for a well-funded pension system. In 1978, and perhaps earlier, the General Assembly began declaring pension holidays. That means that it did not put the requisite amount into the 5 state-run pension funds that year. Every now and then, there would be another pension holiday. The justification for skipping a year was that the state desperately needed the money for other projects. Some local governments and school districts also regularly took pension holidays. Then there was the issue of corruption. The Blagojevich scandal showed that some of his appointees to the teachers' retirement system, which supports the retirement of all of the public school teachers outside Chicago, were shaking down outside companies. These appointees were apparently telling companies that they would see to it that TRS funds would be invested in those companies, but only in exchange for the CEOs making contributions to the Blagojevich campaign fund. During the go-go days of the 1990s and down to 2008, there was little concern about the funding of the public employee pension funds. In fact, some funds around the country were doing very well, and at least one Illinois fund was turning in impressive rates of returns on investments. When the 2008 Great Recession hit, it was clear that investment returns were and would continue to be terrible. Yet in the midst of the Great Recession, some Illinois governments have been allowed to take even more pension holidays. It is usually accepted that the unfunded liability of the state of Illinois is almost $100 billion. However, that is the figure for the amount we would need if every single person in the 5 pension funds administered by the state who was eligible to retire decided to retire tomorrow. That means that every judge, every university professor, every teacher, you get the idea, who could retire just opted and retired suddenly. Now that's unrealistic. Let me impart a warning here. The Generally Accepted Accounting Principles Board has revised the standards for governmental budgets, including those for pension funding. It is expected that when those standards go into effect next year, they will show a bleak picture for public pension funding, far worse than what we have now. But I don't know exactly what will happen. Stand by, I hate to say this before lunch, but stand by for more bad news in a few months, okay? To me, the figure that we really should be using is how much money we need to make current payments. As of a year or so ago, Illinois was paying $7.7 billion to retirees in the 5 funds. The lion's share went to TRS, about 62% of the funds. I suspect that over half of the funds distributed come from the amounts the employees themselves put in over the years and from investment returns. That means that maybe $3 billion came from the taxpayers. Let me make several observations, which I think are true, although I cannot be absolutely certain. First, by not taxing any pension, public or private, Illinois is losing almost $1 billion a year in revenue. We have not taxed individual pensions since 1984. If we taxed pensions, that could make up about 1/3 of the amount taxpayers need to put into the funds to make them viable on the basis of how much we need to meet current obligations. Second, I do not think that health care and other benefits are part of the pension guarantee. New York courts have held that New York's guarantee does not apply to health benefits. I realize that some state courts have held otherwise, but I think the majority have held that the pension guarantee applies only to the core pension. Given that health costs are rising, that means that health benefits are more important to the employees and more costly to the employers. I think the Constitution does not guarantee them. Of course, some union contracts may provide for health benefits for retirees. Third, I think it would be constitutional to give employees an option to refuse the state plan on a going forward basis in exchange for a different plan. For example, teachers could elect to be participants in Social Security and have an individual retirement account. Any rights these employees have accrued already would be preserved in the state pension system. The litigation about the recently passed Pension Reform Act is going on in Sangamon County right now. The plaintiffs have filed their complaints and briefs. The court has consolidated the various cases challenging the pension reform statute passed by the legislature and signed by the governor just last winter. The judge has given the defendant, the state, until May 15, 2014 to file a response. Then there will be a status hearing on May 22nd. It is clear that we won't have a decision at the circuit court level alone until after June 1st, 2014, when the act starts to go into effect. We probably won't have a final decision from the Illinois Supreme Court before the end of the year, maybe not until 2015. The litigation is complex. However, it boils down to 2 areas covered in the bill passed. First, the attempt to clean up the regulation of who gets a pension and when. Second, the huge issue of COLAs and other benefits that accrued after an employee vested in his rights. The first one, I think, is long overdue. Over the decades, probably starting in the 1960s, the General Assembly has allowed the tagging of credits from one pension fund to another. If I vested in shares, and I did vest, before I took all my money out to go to Italy, okay? I'm beginning to regret that, It then worked in another area of state government that allowed me to tag. I could increase my pension. In some ways, this was good, even necessary. However, the system has grown so much that there have been abuses. Clearly, in some cases, legislators were doing favors for certain friends in government, and that has to be cleaned up, and part of the bill attempts to do that. The second one is the issue we are really debating. Many of the news commentators and so-called pension reform groups are really eager to attack COLAs. Why? because they cost the state the most money and have the potential to cost even more. Most of those criticizing the current pension system maintain that the pension guarantee applies only to the pension in effect at the time the employee's pension rights vest, not to the COLAs and increased benefits that become effective after the date of vesting. I think this contention is debatable. I am sure the Illinois courts are aware that on February 20th, 2014, the Supreme Court of Arizona held that the Arizona constitutional guarantee, which is quite similar to that of Illinois, extended to COLAs. Now that's Arizona. Broadly speaking then, the Illinois Pension Reform Bill just passed has provisions on regulation, such as tagging, and on subsequent benefits, such as COLAs. I do not know what the Illinois courts will say. I long ago gave away my crystal ball. Okay? However, I am inclined to think they will look favorably upon attempts to revise the regulations, who gets a pension and when. The really difficult issue is that of subsequent benefits, such as COLAs. Let's go back to the wording of the guarantee. It says enforceable contractual relationship. When I first studied contracts many years ago, I learned that the key to contracts is that of reliance. Did either party have the right to rely upon something in the contract? In short, what's the real essence of the contract? If we apply the concept of reliance to the issues relating to the pension guarantee, what do we see? I think we see that there are four classes of people involved. First, there are those who have not entered public employment at all yet. Second, there are those who are employed but whose rights have not yet vested. Third, there are those who are employed and whose rights have already vested. Fourth, there are those who have already retired as vested public employees. Think reliance. You will be delighted to know that I think that the group with the greatest claim to reliance upon COLAs and other benefits is the public employees whose rights have vested and who have already retired. These are the people who have placed the greatest reliance upon the contract with government. Reliance. I'm looking out at you and I'm saying, is this my class? You know, in commercial reliance. Got that? That's the issue. And what would happen if we cut their pensions in order to be fair or to make the retirees bear their share of the cost of getting Illinois out of the fiscal crisis, you know, the phrases we hear all the time? Would we see retired university professors trying to find jobs as clerks at a Barnes & Noble? Would we see retired prison guards trying to work for private security firms on the night shift? What kind of a system is that? And if things got bad enough, some of those retirees may end up on Medicaid, which costs Illinois money, so what would we say? Okay? The second greatest claim is the one made by the employees who are still working, but whose rights have already vested. This is a large number of people. I have no doubt that is the most pressing issue before the courts in the current litigation. To me, the key to understanding this claim is the answer to the question, would a reasonable person entering state employment have thought that when his pension vested, he had a contractual right to future COLAs? In short, were future COLAs something that an employee would have relied upon as part of his contract? The other two classes, the employees whose rights have not yet vested and those who are not yet employees, have no real claim based on Article 13, Section 5. However, we have to consider that people who opt out of public employment can hurt Illinois. If people don't want to be public school teachers, police officers, firefighters, prison guards, highway maintenance workers, or public university professors, the whole state will suffer. Let me suggest in closing, and I've never said this in public before, but I think this is the group that I can say this to. Because, you know, you're at a very high level of sophistication, and you're not just interested in money. I'm interested in money, you're interested, but we're not just interested in money. We're also interested really generally in the public policy of this state in the future. Let me say in closing that I think that the pension issues are just part of a bigger debate. I think that this country is having a grand conversation. The conversation is about what the role of government and of governmental employees should be. My sense is that there are many Americans who think that there should be fewer employees. Of course, that brings up the question of who would perform governmental services. There are those who think that we can privatize most governmental services. There has been a movement to have private correctional facilities. In other words, the Department of Corrections would contract with private corrections operators, as they're called, to run the prisons. The charter school movement is growing and competes with public schools. Of course, there is a role for privatization of some services, what we like to call public-private partnerships. Even some private entities contract with outside providers for some services. Most hotels do not run their own valet services or even garages. They contract out to outside providers who supply the labor and the salaries and benefits for the laborers. Many private entities contract with cleaning services to provide cleaners who come in at night. But there is a serious question about the extent to which we can do this in the public sector. I think you can guess that I am not a fan of privatized prisons or charter schools run by private companies. At what point is a governmental service so essential that it absolutely must be run by public employees? There are some who would like to dismantle or at least reduce the power of the public employee pension funds. These funds are major players in the stock market, and their directors sometimes ask questions about how the companies the funds are invested in are being run. Sometimes the directors of those funds even sue or at least threaten to sue the companies. Then there are those who want to dismantle or at least reduce the power of public employee unions. They see the unions as political players in state and local government. If they don't like the policies of the unions, they would like to cut off the union's revenue, public pension funds. I think that the issue of public employee pensions is part of the conversation we Americans are having. What kind of public service do we want? How much are we willing to pay for it? And do we think that public employees should be providing that service? In short, what is the role of public employees? Okay. As proof that I am over 70, have I got the arthritis, and I'm hard of hearing, but she'll help me, okay?
Would you like to sit down?
Here, I'll sit over here, okay? I can still be on the tape, okay? All right.
That wasn't what I intended to do.
What did you want?
I wanted to
provide me with this, huh?
Yeah, like that.
These things don't work for me. Hello? Yes.
This one's yours.
Okay.
We have questions and we have a mic that we're going to toss so that the sound gets picked up. Several questions.
I guess I have the mic first. One comment, I've likened some of those law cases in the 80s, I think Sadowski, where we've sued to have funding. And in essence, we've been saying, folks, the barn door is open, the horses are getting out. And the new pension bill says, hey, the barn door is open, it's your responsibility to round up those horses. So we've given a warning, and it's essentially been ignored up until now.
The People X Skladowski case is much misunderstood. A judge named Skladowski filed a lawsuit many years ago, I think on behalf of all the other judges, saying our pension system is so drastically underfunded that I'm not going to be able to get my pension. And this was the judges having to decide this, which is a necessity, unfortunately. And they said, well, we're not there yet. But they did not say, and this is what it's always quoted for, and it's wrong, they did not say the issue of the level of funding for the judge's pension and other pensions is beyond our review. They just said we haven't reached that level yet. And I think the question is, at what point when we get that, we're down at 40% again, 38% last year, I think. You're going to have to ask yourself, at what point is it just simply so low that it would be appropriate for somebody to bring a lawsuit based on the absolute lack of public funding? Let me also say, of the 5 pension funds, I think the best run one is that for the judges. And that's because there is no governmental, no employer side person. The judges and retired judges run the whole thing. And they know how to run it, and they run it very well, and they don't have to worry about gubernatorial appointees or anything. I mean, they run it. And they take full responsibility, and any judge who wants to yell and scream at the board is screaming at another judge. Kind of watched it happen, distant. And let me tell you something. It's interesting to watch, I love lawyers, Okay.
I don't have a question. What I really, just a comment on the last part of your address, which I enjoyed a lot.
Closer.
A little closer. And you mentioned the people in whose interest it is to the various classes of people, and that broadened my view of this, and I appreciate that a lot.
I don't mention names, I don't mention groups. I'm not sure what people's motives are at any given time, but I've seen this happening, and I'm seeing a trend, which is some of these pension funds can be quite huge. Okay, what's the biggie? Public pension fund.
CalPERS.
CalPERS. I mean, why do they take after CalPERS? Anybody, come on, we know, right? I mean, nothing that any of us is in comes close. I am, of course, in TIAA CREF, which I hope is going to provide for me in my old age. And TIAA CREF is private, it is quite big, but I mean, just think of the size of CalPERS. I mean, look at the size of California.
I just saw some figures, or I've seen recently some figures, where the state of Illinois is spending 77% more on funding things like benefits for Caterpillar and other supposedly bring industry in and what have you. Could you comment on that? 77% more of the...
I'm very distrustful of any figures. Apart from the fact that, as my sister, who is a mathematician, says, how did an enumerate like you get through law school? I've learned over the last 43 years in and around state government, that it depends on who's putting these figures together. You know, I mentioned that thing about, they say, oh, $100 billion in the pension. I said, okay, they talk about discount rates and projected life expectancy spans. You know, what's your projected life expectancy and how close is it going to be accurate, right? And that's why I go with the issue of how much we would put out per year. And the accounting people tell me I'm dead wrong, and I look at it, I say, well, if you've got a better idea, and they start, I don't want to insult, are there any accountants here? Okay. They start throwing all these charts around. I say, bottom line is, how much do we need? And they say, oh, over a 35-year period. I said, I will be dead in 35 years. Give me an idea of what we can do, at least in the near future. Because the farther out you go, the less accurate or less certain I can be that your figures are accurate. And so then you start asking yourself, who is, I hate to say who's paying for these studies, but you know, I do start asking. I'm very skeptical. No. Oh dear, nobody?
Hi, thank you very much. My question relates to what if there is an amendment to change the Constitution? That's one of the things that I worry about. Well, how does that impact what our current benefits are? Could those be taken away if the Constitution changes?
This is what the litigation is going to decide. To what extent does the amendment protect certain kinds of benefits? And I'm very cautious about making these predictions. I think, as I say, that all of that stuff about who tags what when, which we're not going to mention names, are we, any of us? But we all know some interesting little tagging that has gone on. And I think that's one set of issues. Another set is the really important one about the COLAs. And here I really hate to give an opinion because although I am in communication, I'm not advising any of the lawyers who are litigating. I do not advise. If I get involved in litigation, then I cannot speak as an independent observer, and I'm very careful about that. But occasionally they call and ask me about the background of the provisions, so I talk to them. And I said, when am I going to see all of the data, all of the charts that you're going to bring forth to the Circuit Court of Sangamon County? Because that's what's really going to be important. How much is involved in the COLAs? What are the actuarial and accounting issues that are involved here? I haven't seen it. So I don't know where they're going to go with it.
Maybe I wasn't clear with my question. Let's assume that somehow the lawsuit is won and that the COLAs are deemed right now as being constitutionally protected. My question is then, what happens then the following year if there's an amendment to change the Constitution?
Well,
how would that impact what we already heard?
Is the following year there will be an amendment of the variety that we saw in 2012, in which there was an attempt to change the Article 13, Section 5 language so that it took 3/5 of each house to raise pension benefits, which of course, as I said in the newspapers, and that's how I got involved with SUAA when Linda Brookhart came to me and asked me about this. I said, look, all of these pension bills passed by more than 3/5. This is silly. You can't just raise it to 3/5, think you're going to stop anything. But so help me, I think what will happen will be an attempt just simply to abolish it, utterly and completely. And before you think that everybody is on your side, let me remind you that with unified opposition by the public employee unions, and with running ads, I loved it. My mother should have been alive to see it. The ads that SUAA took out, respected law professor Ann Lousin says, even with all of this, it got 58% of the vote, and it needed 60. Now that's awful close. And when I've talked with people who are on private pensions, they say, why should the public employees get more than I get? I have no guarantee. So that is the situation we are going to have to face. Now, I think ahead, and one of the things I think ahead about is that, so what if it were eliminated? Then what would we have? Well, what we see in the states that don't have a public employee pension clause is that those states have to start looking at a clause which says there can, and their state constitution, which says there can be no impairment of contracts. And that's a general clause. It's not just for public employee pensions. So that's the shift in the focus of the litigation. The litigation will become incredibly expensive, incredibly complex, and it will go on for years and years. Boy, am I cheerful. But, you know, I mean, I have to tell you what's going to happen. There are people out there, I mean, I had one woman say, she used to work for Congress yet. She said to me, I don't think they should have pensions or a guarantee. I said, why not? She said, I hated my teachers in elementary school. She got, I always, every now and then I say to myself, she got through law school. Thank God, not at John Marshall. Okay.
Could I just ask a clarification of your answer, and that is, if indeed we are successful with the lawsuits, and then next year our enemies put through an amendment and it passes to do away with the pension impairment and so forth, would we have protection under the U.S. Constitution for impairment of contracts that they can't?
We very likely would, but the litigation under the federal no impairment of contracts by the state clause, that, I think it's Article 1, Section 10, the United States Constitution. I've had occasion to research it in other contexts. To describe it as chaotic would be an understatement. So I have no idea what would happen with that litigation, but it is going on in some other states that don't have a public employee pension clause. You know, we're not the only state that's facing this. You know, I hope I made that point. You know, out in Wyoming, they're doing the same thing, which is we can't afford all of these pensions. And I've got a line which is, what if all of these people leave public employment? Really? And they say, well, they won't leave. I said, why? Why would you think they wouldn't? I said, well, what makes you think that your kid is really going to say, I want to become a public school teacher when this is what you're doing to public school teachers? You know, it just, it's what I call the grand conversation. That's what I call it.
Thank you. Merrill just asked the question I wanted to ask about the involvement of the federal Constitution. But the other thing is, this seems to be a particularly diverse set of issues, both in the bills and in the situation. And therefore, it brings it to the court in a strange sort of ways as to whether each case will be handled separately or together. Do you have any feeling as to how the courts are perceiving this kind of a diverse issue case?
First, let me say that many, many judges I know who know me, and I know them. And they always say, oh, it's you, you know. Because they've read my columns on this. And sometimes they say, thank you, for saying things I can't say. But they and I cannot discuss these issues. My guess is that the Illinois state judges are well aware of the fact that this is a very complex issue. They are well aware that the state has great financial difficulties, and there doesn't seem to be any expectation that in the next year or two we're going to get out of the hole. But then they are also aware, now this is, my impression. Remember, I cannot ask a judge, how do you feel about this? So very properly say to me, I can't discuss that, I think they are well aware that whatever decision they make could impact all of public employment, which is, by the way, approximately 10% of all of Illinois. And 10% of us either are public employees, retired public employees, or are closely related to a public employee. All right? And they're aware of that. By the way, did you know that Illinois probably has a lower percentage of public employees per population than any state in the Union? mean, seriously, when you look at it, they talk about how those public employees have become such a big lobby and they've taken over everything. I said, you know, that's one thing I do check with the fact sheets. And we're a big private enterprise type of state. You know, we got a lot of private colleges. We've got a lot of private elementary and secondary schools. But we do not, of course, have private police forces.
First of all, I want to thank you. Really enjoying the presentation. You're doing a great job. My concern, I'm always concerned whenever I go to anything having to do with the pensions. You mentioned about how the pensions got the way that they are. And I don't know if they'll ever be solvent, but I'm concerned about what's going to stop it from having problems in the future. You know, nobody has sort of taken responsibility for what's happened. And I'm just afraid that no matter what decision they make, that when the pension is really set again or maybe solved, then people will start allocating the money again. And you have any...
They might reallocate the money again. The case I mentioned in Springfield yesterday, which is about 25 pages long, and I've just skimmed it. That's going to be an interesting, very serious question as to at what point, by the way, the public pension clause was not implicated in that. That was a provision of the Constitution in the local government article concerning salaries of local government officers. Forget it, you know. But there's a good analogy here. And I think if they start talking about ordering the legislature to fund things, that is breathtaking. Breathtaking. And, you know, I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime. Your life. One or two of you appear to be younger than I am. Your lifetimes, either.
Now, I know medical insurance is not protected by the state constitution.
Let's put it this way, I do not think so. That is the position I have taken. But, again, who knows?
But isn't it a contract when you sign up here at the university and they guarantee you 20 years free medical insurance? That could be a separate contractual agreement?
Yeah, that would be a separate contractual arrangement. I know that some of the public employee unions have negotiated health care benefits for retirees. Don't some of the downstate school teachers have that? I honestly don't know. Yeah.
Okay, he just told me that's part of the lawsuit also.
There is a lawsuit pending.
You gotta understand, it started out as 2 lawsuits, then 3 lawsuits, then 4, and I hope that we've kind of closed the door here. Because when you get too many groups of plaintiffs involved, and too many lawyers, you know, everybody's running the lawsuit, you know what you get? You get a...
Service.
Somebody said you get a committee, and that sounds terrible, but you know, what you get is too many people running it. And I have great respect for those lawyers whose names I've seen. I know several of them. But, you know, there's got to be some kind of a unified front here. But the argument I've gotten in back, and I've read the complaints now, and I've said, why don't you guys all consolidate it? This when they were not yet consolidated. They said, well, we actually do have different claims. You know, the downstate teachers, TRS, are not the university professors, are not SARES, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. What can I say?
Okay, one other question I have. That $100 billion unfunded liability. Does that take into account an employee that starts yesterday and they're taking that liability 30 years down the road when he must retire? Isn't that over-exaggerated?
Well, that is what I have asked. I have asked. And you know what I get in answer is, well, that's the figure. You know, and I really like to know the truth, boiled down to something that an enumerate like me can understand. And I think that's been part of the problem. There's been no real understanding of what the really core issues are here and what the reality is here. I've mentioned a couple of realities. One that I mention all the time is if you start forcing retirees to go on Medicaid, you are going to, oh, I know, most of you think you'd never go on Medicaid, you're probably right. But I knew some janitors down at the Illinois State Capitol who were pretty elderly then and just barely able to do their jobs. I suppose they're dead now. But if they were still alive, they're in nursing home. We're going to put them on Medicaid because we say, okay, you'll get 80% of your pension, that's your contribution to the financial health of the state of Illinois. Well, then they will go on Medicaid. And if they go on Medicaid, it is a federal-state partnership, right? Which means now we're going to be paying through Medicaid what we could have been paying through the health care component of a retirement program. These are the issues that I like to call to people's attention. It's so simple when people say, oh, well, we'll just take away their health care. I said, what are you going to do if they end up on Medicaid? I don't care. I said, you better care, because we're all going to pay for it. Excuse me. Is there a hook? I see a hook.
Bill is here.
She's got the hook.
Is anybody, these guys have already had a chance, so I'm going to... And we have about time for maybe 2 more questions. Anybody who hasn't yet asked one to us? We may have...
You addressed the core pension and the COLA and the health care, but you didn't talk about, and tagging, about the annuitant age, not the age of retirement, but the age at which you can collect. And that has been in the mix of change as well. And it seems to me that I call it the Pension Default Act. I think reform is a ridiculous word. It's not reform, it's default. But it was very, very careful about that. In my mind, sort of unnecessarily so, and I wonder what that's all about.
I know far less about the annuitant age aspects of it. I've tried to read up on it, and this is sort of this is beyond me type of situation. You know, I lose comprehension very quickly. Part of the difficulty here is that when the pension provision became effective, we still had mandatory retirement ages in a lot of private and public pension systems, usually 65 or 70. Then came the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, ADEA, and as you all remember, that impacted the whole concept of university professor tenure. Remember the date of uncapping? Everybody got it? December the 31st, 1993. Remember that one? Please. The UP officer, I know that one very well. Yeah. And at that point, the question was raised, what do we do with the pensions? Because now a lot of professors are going to stay longer than they would have previously. Now you got a question. What are you going to do with the actuarial tables? I'm 71. I'm planning on teaching until I'm 80, health permitting. Now, 40 years ago, no, but when I started in 1975, so almost 40 years ago, I think I would have said, oh, 70. You know, right? You know what we're talking about? And with you guys in the university system, with changing the annuitant age, that's really a big issue.
Last question for time.
There's some more confusion about the number, and I wanted to run this by you and also the general audience. You know, the politicians and the newspapers say they list under pension the amount of the budget. I've heard 25% of of the operating fund is being spent on pensions. Well, a couple of $1 billion.
Depends on how you define the operating budget. Come on.
Yeah. Well, the total budget of Illinois is somewhere around $55 billion. The operating budget is around 30 and a few other billion maybe. But that's not my point. My point is that they say we're spending 25% of that on pensions. Well, the actual money that goes into pensioners' hands is about 3, and about 4, it goes to pay off the bonds that have been used, pay off previous borrowing. And I'm not sure that all the legislators know that.
They do.
Well, in my experience, brand new legislators don't know that. Those that have been there for some period of time, after a while, begin to understand that one. I can tell you that when it gets down to the local government level, I'm not sure how many aldermen and county commissioner people. I'm not picking on the Chicago Public Schools or Cook County. I'm speaking of the whole state. I'm not sure they entirely understand all of this. I mean, I'm not that they, in a sense they understand, but they understand all of the implications. Remember that the Illinois state budget does not include certain agencies that are considered off-budget, some of which I suspect, from the data I do get to see every now and then, make money. They're running a profit. And if that's true, then why aren't they under the state budget? And why don't we include all of them? And as you can imagine, for some 43 years now, I've had the reputation of being the skunk at the picnic. Why aren't they? You know what I'm talking about? Okay?
Let me just say this briefly. Here we are, all university ex-employees, and across this state there are tens of thousands of people in the various pension systems. But I think one thing we have to keep in mind is whatever the problems on the pension system are, and they are significant, the effects of the kinds of cuts and so forth are going to be extremely severe in terms of elementary, secondary, and collegiate education. And we have to do a far better job of explaining to the public that that is the critical factor that has to be maintained, strengthened, so that Illinois is not becoming the garbage dump of education.
To which I say, amen.
You beat me to a round of applause. You were there. Thank you so much. We do have a lunch for those, some people pre-registered. I just checked. If some of you still are wanting and are willing to join us, we have some extra seats. It is a $15 charge, but we'd like to continue the conversation about so many things, and we hope you can join us. Thank you.